Kia ora friends, and welcome back to my studio. I'm Gina, and today we are going to be starting on the lights for the Labyrinth Ballroom. I'm super excited about bringing this project together. I have done a little bit of a test piece. You'll have to forgive me for starting without you, but I do have 3 of these to create, so we're going to create the other 2 today. So here's what we're going to be creating, and I am super happy with how this has actually turned out. The beads are probably a little bit big, but you get the idea of the actual light itself. And this is all a working light. So let me just put the battery on. So there we go. So they all light up perfectly well. Let me just push that there. So there's going to be 3 of these hanging inside the lantern to give you that real sense of the Labyrinth Ballroom. So I'm really super happy with how this has turned out. So let me show you how I pulled it together, and let's get started. So for the lights, what I'm going to be using are these little nano lights. So just on the little battery there, they just create this little light. So this is going to be the flame of the candle. And then the wires themselves are actually quite bendy, so I'm going to use those to shape the lights. The other wires that I'm going to use are this wire. It's actually quite thin, and compared to the actual wire here, it's actually almost identical. And this is often used in dollhouse wiring, so it's actually very thin. And then the other wire that I'm going to use is to actually kind of simplify it all down and actually connect it all up together. So this is slightly thicker wire compared to this one, you can kind of see. And then also we've got the wire of the light. So those are the 3 different wires that we're going to be using today. So to make the candle, what I'm going to do is use 3 different elements. The first one is a cotton bud, and I'm going to use the middle part of the cotton bud. These ones particularly have a plastic center, and so they have a hole down the middle of it, and that's going to create the look of the actual candle itself. I'm going to use a sequin that is actually going to act as the base to the candle, and I'm particularly using the sequins because they're roughly around about the right size and scale, and it also has a hole in the middle of it. And then I'm going to use these earring backs to actually hold it all together. They fit quite tightly onto the wire of the light, and then I can actually push this up underneath the sequin and it'll actually hold it quite nicely into place. Now I know the lights are really long, and that is actually on purpose. The Inspiration candelabra has these exaggerated long candles, so I really wanted to replicate that look. So using the actual wire from that is on the light, I'm going to use that to bend the arms around into some sort of semi-organic type of shapes, and I'm just going to follow the pattern that I loosely designed on the page. Now to wrap them up to cover all of the wires, I'm using some embroidery cotton, which is sort of this off-white colour. So I'm just going to knot that around the wire, add a little touch of glue, and then I'm just going to set those aside to dry, or the glue to dry, before I move on to the next step. So moving on to this part, which is actually covering the wire itself, all I'm going to do is wrap the cotton around the wire. And I'm just going to loop that round until I get to the length that I'm looking for. And then once I'm happy with that, all I'm going to do then is look to loop the embroidery thread around, create a little bit of a knot, using a little bit of glue, and then just holding that all into place. And then I'll just set these also aside and wait for that glue to dry. There are 7 arms on each one of the candelabras, and there's 3 candelabras, so there's 21 arms to actually work through. So pretty happy with how that's turned out. And then moving on to the next step, I've just got some very thin wire that's used for wiring up doll houses, and then I'm just going to use that to extend the wires of the lights, because they're not long enough to be able to wire them up together. And so here I'm just using my helping hands tool and just wrapping that wire around each other. I know it's a little bit loose at the moment, but I'm actually going to solder this into place, and then once that solder's firmed up, it's actually quite a really lovely secure connection. I'm just going to do both sides, and then once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to use a bit of heat shrink, which I'm actually going to use a little bit in this project, and this is some nice fine stuff, and just using my soldering iron to very gently melt that around the wire just to secure it even further into place. Throughout the process I do test all of the lights just to make sure that they're working, and then I'm moving on to actually pulling the whole candelabra together. So I'm going to again use some of that heat shrink, and because I've got various different sizes of it, so I'm just going to bring 4 of the arms together to begin with, and then put a small piece of that heat shrink over the top, and then melt that into place. And once this is sort of melted into place, it actually creates a really nice firm connection with all of the different arms. So it's a great, well, it's not a great tool, I'm not too sure if it's a great tool, it's the tool that I'm using anyway, and I thought that this would actually help reduce the amount of bulk with having multiple wires or having to twist things together. So it's looking a little bit straggly at the moment, so what I'm going to do is just wrap the ends of all of these threads around each other, and what isn't being wrapped around I'm just going to pull down the length of the candelabra and then just cover it with the embroidery thread as I wrap that around. And this actually does really help tidy up the whole piece, and then it's really starting to come together. So I'm really pleased with how this is looking at this stage. So just to finish it off, all I'm going to do is just add some slightly thicker wire, which is going to add some length to it, so I can actually use this to connect it up without having multiple different wires everywhere. So just trying to simplify the wiring as I go. And moving on to the beadwork, I've got some small glass beads. I've got mostly little ones, and then every now and then I've just put a larger bead into place just to kind of give it a bit of, again, a little bit more of that organic look that I'm trying to go with, even though it's glass. And all I'm using is a piece of what's called invisible thread, which is a very, very thin nylon thread, and then I'm just going to knot that around the first bottom part of the candle, and then I'm just going to sort of eye it up, slightly measure it. Like I say, being organic, it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm just going to slowly work my way around the candelabra and putting all of these loops and threads of beads into place. Gosh, that sound like a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, so here's a little bit of a sped up version of pulling it all together. So this was a really fun little project to pull together, and I am super happy with how it's turned out. So one thing about this project is I haven't wired up all the 3 lights together yet. I want to save that to the final reveal when I pull the whole project together, and there's a couple of more things that I need to do in order to get it to that stage. But I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you've liked what you've seen, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel and all those wonderful YouTubey things. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye for now.